Okay, so in this video I wanted to just talk a little bit about how I create the bedding material that I use in my bins. I saw a video on YouTube that kind of talked a little bit about this, and I decided to modify it for my purposes. And basically I'm using newspaper, and I actually used to put this through a shredder to get it all broken down, and then I was just adding it dry into the worm bins. But then it occurred to me, well, if I'm bringing in partially completed compost from outside, I still need to add moisture. So this idea was about creating a pulp mix using the newspaper. And even when I started doing the pulp mix, I was still shredding the paper, and later on, just to save on the amount of work involved, I started just adding the paper directly. And the water I'm using is actually gray water from the kitchen that we collect in a Tupperware container, and I added there. So we're not using fresh water per se. It's just a way to reuse some of the water that we generate in the kitchen. What I then do is I'll just put the paper in. I just use an example with a small piece here, and I'll use something like this 2x4 here, and typically I'll just push it down to the bottom, and it actually forces some of the paper that's already partially broken down from being in the water to the top. And I have dropped this a second ago. My drill and a paint stirrer, and I've used the metal ones because the plastic ones don't have enough strength to turn the mass of material. So I just put it in there, and then I start spinning it. It's going to be a little bit noisy. Okay, so I'll do that, and once it's at a fairly broken down consistency, I don't like a lot of chunks because it does make the breakdown process a little bit tougher for the worms later on. Let's try to stand this up here. So then after I do that, and I have one already going here, this is a bucket that has a bunch of holes in it, and so it acts like a sieve. And when I pull this up, it sits in a second bucket that doesn't have any holes. And here's the water that has just drained out. And this water, you can see it's actually pretty clear, but definitely not drinking water. But I'll just add that to a bucket. And when I'm watering my plants, I'll use that water to dilute the extract from the bins, and that's what I use to water the plants, the indoor plants, and anything that I'm growing indoors for like leafy greens. And I can go through that in another video. So as an example again, so I'll just scoop some out with the bucket, and you can see what it looks like. It's pulp paper. I just pour it in. Now, initially this will fill the bucket, but as the water starts to drain out through the holes at the bottom, the overall volume will decrease, and then I'll just keep adding. After it's more or less as full as I want it to be, then I actually do this stacking system where the oldest bucket of pulp paper is at the top, and the newer ones are at the bottom. So here's one that I did last week. So you can see, even when it's this full to begin with, when it compresses, and the compression is just to squeeze out a lot of the excess waters. The worms don't need too much need their bins to be super drenched, and all that's going to happen is you'll have a very wet system, and you'll end up collecting all that at the bottom anyway. So again, I'll drain this and pour it into another bucket, and then I'll restack them. So effectively, when this is as full as I need it to be, it'll become the lowest, the bucket at the bottom. Everything will move up a level. When it comes time to get the pulp out for use in the worm bins, I actually then will empty. Remember, this bucket is perforated at the bottom. I'll empty it into a bucket that doesn't have any holes. Here's an empty one as an example. Right? And then I'll start stacking them. So here I have 1, 2. And I'll use the bottom one just because it's been there the longest and it's had some time to compact. These little holes I punch through just because when I do pour the pulp mass into the bucket, it sits and there's this huge gap. And this helps to just get the air out of the bottom so there's no gap. So this is how I build my pulp mix, which in another video I'll show how I mix that with the compost from outside and feed the worms.